Hi, welcome to the session on disrupted workplaces because of pandemic. I hope you're enjoying the conference as much as we're excited to share our learnings. My name is Bilal Baig. I'm the technical director for MENA for Trend Micro. I don't have a lot of time, so let's kick it off as we will review our Trend Micro Mid-Year Cybersecurity Report. All right. At the time, when all the businesses operations are immobilized or even on the verge of shutdown, cyber criminals continue to thrive. So that is unbelievable because they are coming with known and emerging threats every single day. Let's look at the numbers. If you see in the first half of the year, we blocked over 27 billion threats, and there were new ransomware families. We will talk about this in a bit, and the vulnerabilities. But there was a new threat emerged, and that was related to the pandemic COVID-19. We saw big numbers coming in with respect to the emails and whatnot, and this was for the first half of this year. If we look at our MENA region and the threat landscape for the 2020, if you see different countries have these are actually showing you the numbers of blocks which Trend Micro did with respect to the Gulf cluster and GCC and all these countries. Now, if we're talking about COVID-19 and working from home, right? So let's look at the threats which we saw this year in the first half. Um, we saw almost 9 million threats, and most of these threats were coming through the email. Like I said earlier, for the cyber criminals, it did not matter whether you had the pandemic or not. They found new ways to actually compromise the systems, and we see that in our research. If we look at the working from home threats, you notice that more and more threats were coming. You talk about, crashing private calls, installing the fake installers because you have all these remote tools which were working, about the Zoom, Microsoft Teams usage. All of these rocketed because of pandemic, and as the shift from working from home was in high speed and in high demand, threat actors actually use that as a mechanism to start targeting these platforms as well. So we saw a big rise in these. One of the biggest disruptors, and hands down, it is the biggest disruption in a threat market nowadays. If we see the ransomware, we notice that there is less detections in the ransomware. So you see that there are 68% less, but increase in the ransomware families. So that's, you see new and new ransomware are coming. Even with the few detections, ransomware remains a threat, one of the biggest threats, and it is going towards more and more bigger targets. So when we look at the targets, what is the target? Target is getting the money, and we notice that the first quarter of 2020, look at the ransomware demand, right? So 1.3 million jumped from 800,000 last year. So a lot of organizations were getting attacked, but there is a reason behind it. So let's look at it, right? Because these attacks have become more target based and less opportunistic. So opportunistic ransomware is when you send a spam email is sent to the victim. Victim is clicking on the link. They infect themselves, and cyber criminals offer to restore the files. They're not guaranteed you're going to get it back, but if the victim pays the ransom, so that is more of an opportunistic approach. Now, a target and a breach-based ransomware is where a ransom operator knows exactly who the victims are, usually targeting big organizations, and which are more likely to pay because the data is very important to them. So they will go ahead and purchase credentials like RDP username and password from the underground websites, use these credentials to break into the company system and deploy the ransomware. And then they, again, ask for a very big ransom. Victims can be threatened as well with the release of their data and demands are not met. So this, again, I said that, and cannot stress enough, this is one of the biggest disruptors we see still there. What are the preventions method for the ransomware? There are a lot of webinar discussions on it. I will not go back into it, but quickly, unverified emails or links embedded in the items should be opened with caution. Important files should be backed up using a 3-to-1 rule, which is create backup copies on 2 different media with 1 backup in a separate location. So that is very, very important for your critical infrastructure or the data which you have. Regularly updating the software programs and applications, because a lot of ransomware is coming through vulnerabilities, and keeping your personal information safe. But these are the one of the things which all of us talk about. But what we have to also see that it has a big way of coming into an environment. So there are multiple layers where a ransomware can have entry points with the encryption capabilities. If you don't have a good backup and whatnot, so you definitely need a multi-layer approach. So email and web protection is very important. Server protection, protect server from the vulnerabilities which can be exploited. Then we're talking about the network protection part. So if you see on the network side, you have to shield your network by preventing ransomware to come in. And definitely the last is your endpoint protection, which protects your endpoint from the ransomware itself. Let's jump on the messaging threats. So if you look at, there was an increase in the number of phishing URLs from the first half of 2020 as compared to the second half of 2019. One of the other attack parameters we have talked about in the past as well is about the business email compromise. You notice that it has increased in it. So more and more business email compromise detections are coming in, and the biggest targets are the CEOs, right? You notice that in these particular attempts, most of the positions, this is the critical position which gets spoofed a lot of times. And if you look at, finance directors, managers of finance, and all these guys are also getting targeted when you're talking about the business email compromise. Quickly about, how do you protect against these messaging attacks? So first and foremost, emails should be examined for grammatical errors, right? That was a long word. So misspellings and other, suspicious content. Legitimate emails are often proofread, and most of them are free of errors. So another point is the sender email should be closely scrutinized, right? Most of the times we just look at the email and we expect that it is a proper source, but we have to pay attention to that part. One of the things where the emails are not the form of method where personal information is being asked. Most of the organizations, banks and whatnot, do not ask this information. And this has been a modus operandi for most of the organizations. So they do not ask personal information. So if somebody's asking for personal information in an email, definitely, a red flag. Emails with asking you urgently or immediately should not be an outright response to such an email. So you have to step back and think about it, that if it is urgent enough, a person will call and whatnot. So you need to understand this particular part. URLs in the email should be scrutinized as well. So, one of the things we should look at whenever the email is, it is just, looking at an email itself and think of it as, one wrong click or something can cause a big disruption if you don't have securities in place. Um, wow, critical vulnerabilities. Well, now if you look at this one, this is the craziest part. We had over 100 fixes of vulnerabilities this year. If you look at the chart, the average was 72 in 2019, 60 in 2018. We already crossed 100 this year. And in June, it was 129, the biggest one which we saw. Um, US government also added two other bugs in the list because these were the old ones, 2019 ones, but they were related to the pandemic, right? Because a lot of people were using VPN, and these particular vulnerabilities were being exploited in the wild because most people were running the VPN software due to COVID-19 pandemic, right? So therefore, these were got added as well. We saw vulnerabilities increase in the industrial control systems, and you see the rise, a known zero-day attacks as well. So a lot known vulnerabilities were there. Um, uh, if you see, the GDI program published a total of around 786 advisories for the first half of 2020. Okay, and this is an increase from last year second half. You see that the increase over here from 452 to 786, and these vulnerability for both from vendors and independent researchers, right? So like I said, most of the attacks are coming using the vulnerabilities. So one of the things, the best practices is regularly patching zero day and end day vulnerabilities, compliance with the regulations, proactively measuring that vulnerability shielding is there and whatnot, and establishment of patch management systems. What about the IoT? Definitely change of the password of the IoT devices, looking at installing the firmware updates for these devices when they're available. And manufacturers should also make sure that the security implementation from the device to the cloud, if they are, IoT or IoT is there, paying close attention to the vulnerable product components while delivering the patching at the same time. So whenever it is needed. So this is very, very important. Let's look at the target attacks. I'm going very fast. I hope you're getting a little bit of data because it's a big report. So I just want to make sure that I'm able to capture most of the points in it. So um, we saw very new threat groups keep on emerging, and Lazarus was based on Apple based platforms. The attack came in, it was a campaign. Then Tropic Trooper was aimed at the air gap networks of the militaries. So if you see that there were new threat groups which are coming up for gambling sites in Southeast Asia. Then you have politically motivated campaigns in Tibet, Turkey, and Taiwan. So these are very, very new threat groups and targeted attacks, right? And how do you protect against it? So one of the main things you need to protect against is one and foremost, strengthen the security policies and procedures. Improve the employee security knowledge and the awareness of it, and implement definitely the monitoring systems. That's how you are able to see the target attacks as well. And one and foremost is you have to establish a very clear chain of commands for addressing these threats as well. Let's look at mobile threats. So if you see that there was less percentage in the number of blocked Android apps, so people are getting more and more security software in their on their phones, so they are able to deliver blocked apps if they're malicious. But the samples which we saw got increased, so device related malicious samples was increased. So there were the three mobile threats which were the most common. So most was the information stealing ones. Second was the ad fraud, so doing more and more ads on your mobile devices. And then very particular targeted campaigns with respect to the mobile threats. Um, how do you actually protect against these mobile threats? So one and the most important is verify the app legitimacy, right? Before downloading it. So look at the reviews, look at where the installed device must came from a legitimate developer or a source. Um, practice, the same security best practices against network threats you do. So users should also remember that the threats can now traverse your mobile phones, right? And they should be very auspicious links. I talked about that. Phishing emails and other indicators of malicious activity on the mobile device. Um, Physically securing the mobile device and definitely installing mobile security solutions. And this will give you a multi-layer security approach. If you're using a laptop, there's a security software. You're spending more time on your mobile device, so you need to secure your mobile device itself. All right, now I'm coming at the very end of the presentation. So now, if we are looking at all the different fronts of the attacks, right? So we talked about the malware, COVID, working from home. We talked about ransomware protection. We talked about vulnerability. We talked about, your mobile. And all of this requires definitely a multi-layer approach, right? So there is not a single security solution which can cover everything, right? So there is not a magic bullet. In an enterprise, multi-layer approach should be there. It should be from the endpoints, from the servers to the networks, talking about XDR, extended detection and response, cross detection and response, and not just EDR capability. So this is very, very important, having intrusion prevention in place, and looking at these layers, not just silos, but information sharing across these silos, so you make a better decision when an attack or a ransomware or a breach happens. And definitely the weakest, link in the chain, which is us. We have to be aware of these security. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I did it very, very fast. I hope you got some valuable data out of this. Please stay alert and be prepared for any of the adversaries which are there to, cause havoc. And these adversaries do not care whether it's a pandemic or whether there is a disruption in the global space. Their main target is to get the money from the organizations and the individuals. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.